Well, hello there. Welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I didn't see you walk in. This is a show usually revolving around the world of independent culture. The reason I'm doing a little different intro for those of you that are regular listeners is I want to draw you in. We're going to have like a little fireside chat here. And the reason that this is such a special episode is not only the guest, but the message, the revelations. There's so much tied into this episode. Honestly, it's really, really special for me to bring this to you. The guest this week is Buddy Neilsen. He is in a band called Senses Fail. He is the vocalist of the band. He moved out to Los Angeles about, 2 or so years ago. I had only met him prior to him moving to LA via the podcast. He was a very early guest on this show. We immediately clicked. We started to keep more in touch. He moved out here, and then we've hung out a few times. Basically, we've grown close to one another. He's a good guy. We've got a lot of the same ideas in regards to business and the music industry and a bunch of stuff. So fast forward maybe, 6 or so months ago, Buddy and I had lunch. He brought this idea up to me. He was like, hey, so I've got these things that I want to get off my chest and discuss on your show. Would you be interested in helping me? And so we had a discussion about it. And, I'm not going to bury the lead, but basically, this is one of the reasons why I do this show. This is a platform for people to, share their experiences and talk about things that sometimes might be uncomfortable and difficult to bring up. Buddy brought this to me. It was extremely meaningful. The idea of transparency and the idea of putting yourself out there, regardless of either the judgment or controversy or whatever it is that will come about, is irrelevant. It's just honest moments that you could share with other human beings. Buddy was carrying a very large weight around for a very long period of time, and he went through some really, really dark times. Yeah, we're going to discuss those dark times, and he's going to talk a lot about addiction. He's going to talk a lot about many things. So like I said, I'm not going to bury the lead. I'm not going to tell you what we discuss because I want him to do that in his own words. I kind of feel like, I don't know, the show has kind of come into its own with this particular episode. Of course, I had aspirations that this would be meaningful to a select group of people, but as the show continues to grow, it just continually blows my mind the sort of stories that people are comfortable sharing and the perspectives that we're able to get inside these people's lives, their art or whatever it is that they're putting out in the world. It's an incredible thing. So basically, I know this is very self-indulgent in a way, but I wanted to thank all of you for joining me in this journey. And I want to thank Buddy for wanting to share his views and his story. Honestly, the first time in his life is putting himself out there. And, he's not going to do a ton of interviews around this. He wanted this to be kind of the definitive discussion points. Because ultimately, and I want to be clear, by the time that the show is over, it will end on a positive note. He is in a much better place personally now. But this was stuff that, he, prior to this podcast being released, he had shared these struggles with, less than a handful of people. Like I said, that's why this intro is different, serious, not about myself or the show, but just about the platform that this thing is. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Buddy Neilsen from Senses Fail, and I will talk to you afterwards. I've never had a repeat guest. You will be my first repeat. Yeah. Because I feel like most places, like I can get somewhere in an hour with people. So you're breaking molds all over the place here. But I felt, because the last time we talked, that was the first time you and I had ever spent any time together. And it was one of those things where I walked away from it being like, I like you, buddy. Like I don't know. It's weird when I've obviously known about you for years and years prior to that. And it was, I think, one of the most funny anecdotal stories that someone told me you were into Taken. And this was 3 people removed where it's like, oh, I heard Buddy Neilsen likes Taken. And I was like, oh, shit. Like, that's all. And that, someone told me that at the time. It was like, whatever, 2004, 2005. So I was like, you were an untouchable person to me. And so
Taken fans.
And so it was weird for me to hear that and then meet you years later and just be like, oh yeah, you're a human. So I presume that a lot of the I guess the projections that you put out there now are just like, you're like, I am just this normal person, like not normal person, but just like, I am a dude that is just getting on a stage, like, because you've had, because I'm sure in the past there were not so much maybe on your parts, but machinations put in place to create a division between you and the crowd.
Yeah, I think so. I think that sometimes people come at me with some of that. I try to like shut that down right away, just because it just makes me feel uncomfortable. Right. not even because like it's just makes me feel very weird.
You're like, why are you looking at me like that?
I mean, I think there's also been like a lot of different versions of myself. I think that there's a lot of different versions of everybody. You know, I think everybody puts up some level of self for different occasions. You know, when you're with someone, you know, for a long time, you're someone different than when you meet someone for the first time, or when you go to work, you're a different person than when you're at home. It's like you have many different versions of your self, none of which are really truly the core you. Right. And that's sort of feel like there's been many different versions of myself, none of them being very representative of who I maybe actually am.
Right. What takes you years to uncover and discover.
Yeah. Takes a lot of work, I think.
Yeah, no, it does.
Unless you're Morrissey.
And then you just,
I'm hoping to get a Morrissey quote out of this. If I die, I die. I think it's the greatest quote I've ever heard in my life.
It's great. Yeah, it's the most.
I'm not going to worry about that too much. I'll rest when I'm dead.
Right.
I just can't.
You're like, I get it. A very large.
I die. That's so good. That's so perfect. It's so amazing.
It encapsulates everything that he is, and
I unwillingly like Morrissey. I don't want to, but I do like it.
Right.
It was perfect way to. Say that.
It's just like, I get it. Yeah. I love you for that, and I get it. Pulling at the thread in regards to, like you're saying, putting so many different versions of yourself. You know, your upbringing, you know, in New Jersey, and the sort of whatever patterns or things that you started to notice that could be, you know, defined as either destructive just in your family around you. How was your upbringing influencing you at that particular time that you can obviously look back on now and reflect? Yeah,
I mean, I think a lot of it starts from my very early memories. I was born into a pretty unstable situation.
Okay.
Just family-wise. You know, it wasn't bad. It wasn't abusive at all or anything like that. It was just, it's...
volatile in the sense of like...
Well, I mean, it wasn't... My parents were clearly, as long as I can remember, not in love and not going...
Not a union.
Not a union. And it was... my parents ended up getting divorced when I was 5. So any semblance of like solid ground, I never really had.
Okay.
And, you know, one of my earliest memories is just sheer like panic.
Okay.
Which, I mean, obviously now that I look back on it, really sets the stage for, you know, growing out of, you know, I mean, one of my earliest memories is just catching my parents like in a fight.
We're clearly not supposed to see.
Yeah, you know, and I don't remember too much of it. I only really remember emotions. Really, I remember like panic attack.
Yeah,
you know, at the age of 5, you know, kind of being in a situation where my whole world is my house, my parents. That's it. I don't know. I don't have any other. I have nothing.
Right.
So to really see that, I think, and
it shook you. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it molded a reaction to all future occurrences, like that this was going to sort of be my body chemistry for how I can come into contact with stress, with obstacles, with things.
Sure. Did you in the divorce, did you end up with your mother or your father?
I ended up with my mom.
Okay.
And it wasn't really that messy of a divorce or anything. It was really just, I think, I have this very, you know, and I've talked about it in a lot of my songs. I have this very strange memory on the 4th of July in like 1989.
Okay.
That I don't know what happened, and I wish I could have the memory back, but it was the first time I'd ever felt like that sheer panic. If anybody's had a panic attack where your sort of heart drops into your stomach, you're sweating.
Sure.
And your sort of sound is magnified, and I mean what it really is. I mean what that really reaction is a fear-based reaction, as if it's the same reaction as if there was a bear.
Yeah, fight or flight.
Yeah, it's a fight or flight response. we have fight, flight, or freeze. You know, there's fight, which is some people react in that way.
Right.
There's the flight, which is the runaway, which is the more of anxiety. And then there's the freeze, which is, animals like this is in our brain from coming up from being a lizard.
Yep.
We have those responses, and they're like automated.
Totally.
And so the panic one for me was I don't know, it was for whatever reason it was the one that
you went to, sure.
one I went to protect myself because whatever was happening, and I don't really know. I can't even honestly really tell you if it was any sort of abuse or I don't know what it was. I don't have access to a lot of those memories. I mean,
you just know something traumatic happened on that.
Clearly it wasn't good. I mean, and I've been working through a lot of it, trying to like re-access a lot of those memories.
Sure. Through hypnosis and stuff like that?
No, just through meditation and just trying to allow myself, because there's a lock.
There is.
My body obviously remembers. It obviously remembered.
It left an imprint,
that
right?
reaction and how to react then moving forward through my life to situations and relational situations. But my mind, my brain, the actual images and content of what happened kind of escapes me, even though I do remember very specific things. I remember it's very odd. I mean, I remember, the setting, the smell. I remember certain sounds. I remember the smell of alcohol on my dad's breath, but I don't remember anything that happened.
Right.
It was very kind
of. You don't remember the event, but you remember the colors and the textures around it. Yeah, yeah. Which, I mean, that is very symptomatic of, like you said, where it's like that something terrible happened.
I had some sort of traumatic experience that
totally. And you had like a psychological break to where it's like, I cannot function moving forward. Right.
Yeah. And so when I was 5, 6, I had some sort of traumatic event or multiple traumatic events, which I don't really remember. And I wish I could, because there's a part of me that doesn't understand.
Well, above all, you're just curious.
Yeah. I just really know what the fuck happened and why I decided there was that break, because you overload and then your body goes fight, flight, freeze.
Totally.
Like, this is too much.
We got to shut this down.
We got to shut it down. We have to protect you.
We have to burn these synapses. Yeah. We have to take...
And then that's what happened. And that happened when I was, fucking 5 years old. And I remember that feeling every time I have a panic attack or any kind of anxious episode. I go back to that place.
Okay.
A part of me does.
Yeah.
A part of me
recognizes
still that child, that 5-year-old that had whatever traumatic event happen.
Yeah.
And and then I think, my parents got divorced and
and then you lived with your mom.
I lived with my mom, and my dad sort of became estranged for the most part.
And so, I mean, did he check in your life?
Yeah, I mean, it was, he was in and out, and he kind of moved around. I mean, it sort of took me a long time to realize that he wasn't going to show up. That took years.
Well, of course, you're hopeful. As a kid, you're just like...
I wouldn't even say hopeful. It was just like...
That's true. From
I didn't even know. I didn't even know like what the for most of my young childhood, I would go every other weekend with him.
Okay.
And he moved around all the time around New York and California, and then came back and got remarried, and I mean it was never a
It was never a stable environment.
No, it was never really a stable environment, and I never really felt at all really 100% comfortable with him.
Yeah. You obviously knew your father, but then you're always entering these strange lives.
Yeah. I mean, you're going back and forth. I mean, every other weekend, I'm sure if anybody grew up like that, I mean, it's very stressful. I mean, as you're growing up, you're just developing a sense of you're trying to develop a sense of what the world is and, where you feel comfortable and what your boundaries are and what works. And you're sort of floating back in between these living situations, none of which ever really feeling whole.
No, for sure.
So, and I'm sure everybody who's grown up without parents, or even in a situation where they're going back and forth, even if it's both parents being completely involved, it's still very disruptive, developing a sense of, I would say, trust in the goodness of life. I think that's something that probably I think was stolen from me at a very young age, was this belief and trust that it doesn't default to awful.
Sure.
If that makes any sense. the default isn't scary, good. Death,
right?
Disassociation,
bad
panic.
Things. Sure.
That's not the default,
right?
But was sort of my default. I mean, that's kind of really. I didn't really ever up until recently, really, and like actively having to really sit down and work at it, really get to experience the other side of things, because my default had been set to, my default is kind of okay, eventually going to fall back to where it was,
right,
or just awful.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, there was you were on that quicksand where it was like, there's a rock you can stand on in the middle of it.
Yeah. I don't think any level of someone's suffering is comparative to other people's. I don't think that anyone has a right, including myself, to compare one's suffering with another's. I don't think that that's what any of this is supposed to be, and I don't think that that does anyone any good. Mm-mm. I don't think that one person's trumps another. I think that that's a really awful, unproductive way to look at stuff, and I think we do that in American culture a lot. I think we do that a lot of the like,
well, you didn't have it as bad as me.
Yeah, it's a very American thing to toughen up.
Yeah, well, everyone's had a bad childhood.
Everybody, and that's. I don't think, I want to make sure that people understand that. One, I'm not coming from a place of saying that mine is any worse. Mine is just as bad as everybody else's who's ever even had any kind of childhood that wasn't
idyllic.
Even if it is idyllic, there's still going to be some level of need that wasn't met. And it's very difficult to grow up with all of our needs being met by parents who are flawed, because a lot of people grow up flawed, and you do the best you can to not pass that down to your child.
Of course.
But there's going to be something you don't get to, or maybe didn't realize or weren't aware of, that, you pass down. And it's so even if you did grow up in an idyllic situation, I mean, it doesn't mean you didn't grow up with any kind of shortcoming or whatever.
Totally. Yeah. Everyone is lacking, like you said before, everyone's lacking for something. It's just a matter of being able to identify what that is, and hopefully be able to, like you have been doing, where you're working on it and you're hopefully trying to move past it. Yeah.
And I just wanted to say that, because I know that's could be a response.
Totally.
To when people, I think, become kind of vulnerable and talk about the way they grew up. I think one way to respond, to overuse that, where you kind of use that as a crutch, but then you can also just be like, wow, my life was worse. And, or, cause I did that to myself for a long time. I was like, I grew up fine. Like nothing's wrong with me. Like I have a roof over, and that's very true. But there's also a bunch of things that happen that if I didn't accept that they were harmful and bad, that I would never have a chance to move past that. So it's like I ignored for so long that, because I grew up well off, and because I grew up in a situation where, I ended up having a great stepfather, and I have a great mom, and my dad is great too. It just all didn't cohesively work as expected, and left me with some bumps and bruises, and some of them deep and some of them not so much. Like, I wasn't willing to sort of allow myself to have any sort of
like the recognition of that.
Yeah, the recognition of that. Just having the recognition of it took 29 years. Totally. I mean, because it was so much, like, I just didn't want to give myself the freedom to go, that's fucking tough. That was really fucking tough.
Right.
For your first memory, one of your first memories to be, equivalent to being in the middle of the wilderness, standing in front of a bear, going, "What the fuck am I supposed to do?" It's
totally.
And it's not making that dramatic. That is actually your body's response to when you have the fight, flight, freeze. This is your body pumping chemicals.
That's the blueprint in which
how we survive, and how my body was that convinced that I was in some sort of danger that.
For a majority of your childhood. Right.
And because even after that, I mean, my parents got divorced, and we ended up moving, and I moved to New Jersey, because I had lived in upstate New York on a lake. It was like, we lived in a house that was owned by the B-52s.
It was pretty nice.
It was, and then that broke up,
New Jersey.
Moved to New Jersey. My grandparents had lived with us. My grandma, and this makes sense for later on. My grandma and my grandpa were probably the most common fixtures in my life until I was about 8 or 7, because they moved in with my mom and my dad once we moved out. Because I was born in New York City. Right. We moved out. Some story where some like homeless man reached into the carriage and was like, let me touch your kid. And mom was like, we're moving out of the city. And it's in the 80s.
We got to get out of here.
It was 80s New York City. It wasn't, it's not like
Times Square cheese ball.
80s New York City.
There's some crime.
Yeah. So my grandparents moved in because they both worked in the city, because they both worked on soap operas.
Okay.
They both were on As the World. They both were on Guiding Light.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, both my dad and my mom. That's where they met.
Okay.
So they would drive like an hour and a half to the city every day. So my grandparents moved in and they took care of me. And they really, my grandma kind of really,
So basically your parents were just mimicking a soap opera.
I mean,
not to make light of the situation.
It was a real life soap opera, I guess.
That's crazy. I had no idea. And so, but you're obviously...
my grandparents kind of, my grandma was really, sort of the one constant. And after the divorce, they moved with us to New Jersey, and she lived there with us for a couple years. So for that period of time where I was sort of like, losing my shit as a 5-6-year-old, I guess, my grandma was sort of there. So I really identify, with her. And I think that'll set the stage for later on in this story, when she explains a lot more of the census fail stuff and some stuff happens. But
right.
Just put it out there that, I have a deep... connection with my grandma, as also my second mother, as also someone that raised me and someone that was like constant in
paternal to you. Right.
So we moved to New Jersey, and I think it was like 7, 8, 9.
Okay.
I just was growing up.
Sure.
And it was difficult. It was very difficult to move. It was very difficult to. I didn't sleep very well. I didn't sleep at night. I used to not be able to sleep. I used to wander around the house.
Oh, wow.
I was like 7 or 8 years old, 9 years old.
Sure.
I couldn't sleep. I'd have so much anxiety.
Okay.
That I wouldn't sleep through the night. I just wander around. It
sure. You would have to like physically exhaust yourself.
Yeah. I don't even know what I'd really do. I'd go and I'd try to sleep in my sister's room sometimes. I ended up sleeping on my mom's floor a lot from, I think, the time I was like 7 till 10 or 11 till I hit puberty.
Yeah. It was whether preteens.
So that phase,
elementary school.
Until because I was like, I really didn't ever feel like comfortable at night. I couldn't. It was like something, whatever traumatic thing happened, which I still don't know. Which I wish it happened at night. I mean, I specifically know. It was a night,
right? Yeah, that was part of the texture,
texture, and sort of. I was never able to sleep. So 7, 8. It was just weird. It was really weird, and I blocked a lot of it out for most of my life. But now coming, back to it, just recognizing, just
like that's not normal.
No, that's not normal, and it was terrible. I mean, just having anxiety and panic attacks at that age, and not really understanding or having a place to like do anything with it.
Of course.
Like,
you just kept you kept it, and you had.
I didn't even know how to explain it to people. I mean, the way I used to explain it was I have a stomach ache. And that's really not a...
Well, that's a catch-all. That's the only way as a child you know how to express yourself. Like, my head hurts. Or that's it.
And now I used to say, my stomach used to hurt all the time. And it was like, it was just anxiety.
You're giving yourself ulcers.
Yeah, it was anxiety. I mean, I just had constant anxiety. I just didn't know what it was, and I didn't know how to explain it, and nobody really knew. And so elementary school was...
I'm sure you were sleepwalking through most of it as well.
I didn't really have a lot of friends, and as I'm sure a lot of people, have that awkward stage where
figuring themselves out,
or just your friends are forced upon you by nature of who your parents are friends with, and,
right. Or through proximity,
you go hang out with someone one time, and then you never hang out with them again. Just like you do all that weird shit. Like
Oh, I guess that guy's my friend.
You don't even know. It's a really weird. It's like really awkward.
Yeah,
it was a really awkward phase in my life because I was, once I hit puberty, things would get better because my hormones would just slam in, and I sort of deadened everything that had happened up until then. Because it was like
everything else was heightened.
There was a focus to my focus changed like when I got into music.
Oh, really, I'm sure. Yeah,
it was like the one thing that I think when I was in 4th grade, I started listening to the radio, and it was like, Nirvana and REM and.
Sure.
all that stuff, and then Rancid and Green Day and Offspring and Metallica. Like that was my first record ever was Master Puppets by Metallica. I was like 11 and I was like, this, I don't know why, but this is it. This is it. This speaks to me. This represents something I can't say.
Yeah, these guys are saying it though.
These guys are saying it
and playing it.
And this is it. And that's like I switched. I went from like stumbling around, not really, to I'm gonna fucking break shit.
Right.
And I'm gonna be fucking loud. And I'm gonna fucking yell.
Right. I got my voice. Sure.
And I'm gonna fucking. This is how I'm gonna make friends with people.
Right.
So that's what I started doing. I was like the kid. I would be like, "Hey, buddy, throw that chair down the stairs." Be like, absolutely.
Right.
Fuck yeah.
Of course.
So that's when I started doing stuff like that.
Right.
So I started listening to punk
Sure.
and metal
Right.
and started doing stuff like that. And then I got friends. And I was like, this is fucking killer.
Yeah.
You know,
I keyed into something.
No,
here.
but I was like, it was the first time that I felt like, I think I've been floating in this ether of like birth until now, just sort of like, just never really being able to latch on to anything because it just
didn't feel
sort
right,
of felt like it was, and obviously, your parents splitting up at that age and very developmental stage, it kind of takes the rug out from under you literally to where you just don't feel that anything is really going to be solid.
That's true.
Which is a lot of what causes the anxiety because you don't feel like you have a solid foot on anything.
Of course.
Because you actually don't because you're 5 and your whole
the whole structure
hierarchy structure splits apart.
Right.
You lose any sort of solid footing. So I really didn't get any solid footing until I really like got into metal and punk and started like acting out.
Yeah.
And like realizing that the acting out led people to want to be with me.
Right.
So like I'd started a long history of, being the kid in class that was just fucking making paper wasps and shooting people and sniffing markers and, hey, well, let's throw all the markers out the fucking window, put a golf ball in the teacher's tailpipe. I didn't know what that could have killed someone. Sit around for hours waiting until she turns it on, shot out, hit a girl in the leg. One time I put a giant boulder in a girl's backpack and me and my friends followed her home and watched her struggle carrying the backpack. Like that's the level of
the joy you were getting
out of other people's suffering, which is really fucked up. But
well, yeah, but
that was really my only way to relate to people. Like really my only way to and still up until really recently, my only way to relate to people was to relate to them in coming from a way of suffering. Mm-hmm. Anytime I encountered anybody that was happy, I wanted to destroy their happiness. Sure. I was secretly completely jealous of it.
Right.
And I also felt very uncomfortable because I didn't know how to relate to somebody who was emitting any kind of joy or happiness because all I'd really...
You're like, I don't identify with that. How can I change you?
Yeah.
But, so I acted out through much of...
Yeah, most of high
early
school.
Puberty.
Sure.
Not even so much high school. This is more like...
Elementary school.
4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th.
Okay. Junior high-ish, yeah.
Really just was the person that was literally like ruining people's days.
Of course, right. People would actively avoid you because it's like, buddy's going to screw with me.
Yeah, I wasn't like violent. I really wasn't violent.
Well,
I was emotionally violent, which I felt was much more destructive.
Oh, for sure.
I was never really a physically violent person.
Right, I'm not going to punch you. I'm going to mentally torture you.
Yeah, I'm going to make fun of the jeans you're wearing.
Of course.
Because that's going to hurt you more than if I...
You'll find that in 10 years.
Yeah, that'll still be there. And, I did a lot of really terrible things to a lot of people at a really, young age, and I just, identified with punk. What that was to me, when you start to see how everybody else is and you start to realize that you're not that way, and you start to realize that you can't be that way, you start to get very internally, I'm flawed.
Of course.
And that thread goes through probably everything I've ever done, really, was this, I'm flawed, I'm fucked up.
Right.
And the reaction, the way to react to that is to be kind with that and to like sort of nurture that. Mm-hmm. My reaction was, I'm going to fuck all of you for what I was given.
That sort of feeling, like once you started to whatever, go to shows and like start to feel that sort of that sense of community. I guess the level of comfort that you maybe felt that you didn't feel elsewhere, like, or was that just the place that you felt like you could go?
I got lost in 90s hip hop before then.
Okay,
so
that's fine.
I veered.
It's fine.
I veered off into Biggie, Tupac.
Completely
I just kind
understand.
of had to. It's kind of kind of all went there.
Right.
So I took like a little detour from that.
I think most 11 and 12 and 13-year-olds do that. I was for sure, and Dre and Snoop were my guys.
Yeah, I veered off and got heavily entrenched in that.
Right.
And I'm glad I did because it was really good. Now that you see it in hindsight,
oh, dude, flawless records.
it's really good.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I like did that.
Right.
But then I came back.
Right.
It's funny because the band that like brought me back to all of it was MXPX.
Okay.
When I was like 14.
Makes total sense.
14.
Yeah.
And Bane.
Okay.
I was like, oh shit. Because I'd like gotten, I think in middle school, I tried a little of everything. And like I said, I kind of was able to get away from a lot of the internalization of everything. And it was more outward.
Right.
It was like, okay, so instead of being internally sort of damaged, I was sort of maybe playing that out by, acting out.
Okay.
Trying to find out and define who I was took up a lot of time. So I kind of just jumped from thing to thing to thing.
Sure.
Like most people do in that time frame.
Right.
And that took up a lot of my focus. So I really didn't really have too much of like, I wasn't experiencing a lot of anxiety or panic attacks then. And I wouldn't really until I was like 20 something.
Okay.
It was all kind of shut down. I kind of like,
you were able to put it out, right?
well,
Sure.
I think I found other ways to deal with it, which was pushing it on other people, acting out,
right.
finding other ways to not internalize it.
Okay.
Because before I'd only been, it's like, this is me. I don't have any other outlet for it, and then it was like, okay, I had found outlets. I found some music. I found sports. I played sports that you wonder
Perfect.
People play sports, you're literally actually hurting other people.
Yeah. That's what you do, right?
You're, playing football and lacrosse, and you get to hit people with a giant stick. Like that was a good outlet for a lot of what was going on.
Right.
So I found that to take up some of the emotional baggage or whatever, or space. And then, when I was like 14, I got back into punk and hardcore, and that's when I really like started going to shows,
right,
and found the local scene.
More involved.
Yeah, and got involved and started bands. And that's really when I turned 180 and was like, came back to like, okay. I had a teacher. I also had a teacher. His name is Mr. May. He's probably the one teacher that everybody has that like had a very significant role in my life. He was, he's in a wheelchair.
Okay.
He got in an accident when he was, in his late 20s, I think, playing just football with his friends, like fucking around.
Wow.
Just broke his
tragic
neck.
accident. Sure.
Yeah, tragic. Just, one of those things that happens. And he was a teacher, and he taught history, and I loved history. It was my favorite subject. And he was my freshman year teacher, and I just was drawn to him because this isn't to, I want to be careful when I say this.
Uh-huh.
I could relate in a way to his level of suffering.
Okay.
And not that I know what it's like, but like, oh wow, this guy, because he told us a story about, it was very, and it really touched me. I'm sure other people would remember it, but how he after his accident, he really like got severely depressed and wanted to kill himself.
Sure.
He's like, I would just sit in my room and think about killing myself. And he didn't ultimately, because he didn't want his mother to, find him. Sure. And, he ended up pushing through all that. And that just really stuck with me because I was like, whoa, like I had never really had any suicidal thoughts. Mm-hmm. It hadn't really.
You didn't know that was an option.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not that it didn't open it up for me. It just more was like, whoa, this guy, there's another person out here
that has had to suffer through the storm, so to speak. Yeah.
And because it was my real first kind of like, I'm sure, you just don't talk about that stuff with other people when you're young. You're not like, hey, how you doing? Like,
but that's like a physical manifestation of hardship. Right.
Yeah. And I saw that, and he made it through it. And it was always sort of like, oh, okay, I feel like that this guy I feel like I can learn something from him.
Yeah, you can relate.
I can relate. And in a way, just that he's had some level of suffering, you know, that like maybe none of the people around me I could relate to. I mean, I could relate to my stepbrothers because when our families came together, it was pretty tumultuous. Like him and I kind of got in a couple fights.
Sure.
I spread a rumor. This is an example of me wanting to hurt someone else. And
Right.
Sort of,
Your manipulation. Sure.
yeah. It's 7th grade, and this is a big deal. 7th grade, our parents were going to get married. We're in the same. My stepbrother and I are the same exact age.
Okay.
Well, he's a little older than me, but
A few months or whatever.
and we'd known each other before our parents got married, so it was like it was strange. It was, and we all had the same friends. So this is kind of like a weird thing, you know, that was happening.
Right.
And I spread a rumor that I caught him jerking off, which in 7th grade is fucking
that's
deadly.
Totally. That's a scarlet A on your chest.
I mean,
right.
that is.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is now, but back in the 90s,
Right. You're a social
97,
pariah. Yeah.
like that's some big shit.
Right.
This is like beginning of the internet type stuff.
Totally.
Like, so he beat me up day of our parents' wedding. That was the end of that.
Right. That was how you worked it out.
Yeah. But he probably the only other person that I was like, yeah, I mean, he gets it. Because he went through it too. It just in a different,
Of course.
his parents got divorced. He had to deal with the same thing.
Yeah. You're like, okay, we have a common
I dealt with it in
experience.
this way. He dealt with it in that way. What, you know, and it was
Right.
just sort of like, other than him though, I didn't really, everybody else, like I either didn't know well enough. I mean, you don't know. I mean, you're not really getting to a level where you really know people that well in middle school, high school.
Of
Like
course.
it's very surface.
Totally.
Oh, you like this? Cool. I like that too. Okay, cool.
Can we spend time together?
You
yeah,
like
exactly.
this? I don't like this. I'll pretend to like this so I can. So
Yeah.
between that teacher and coming back into like hardcore and punk, everything turned to where I'd been ignoring my situation for so many years. I kind of started to look at myself and go, oh shit, like this is, I recognize finally, like
There's some repairs I can.
I couldn't do any yet, but
Right.
I recognize it was the first time of like self-actualization, realization. I'm not like everybody else.
Yeah.
And not in a way that like I'm different like a snowflake, but like,
Yeah.
there's some serious things that like I didn't get or that didn't make sense. And I've kind of like realized that. And that was
Right.
really, you know, that's really why I got so identified with punk music, because that's what was cool about punk is that sort of flaws were almost like they were celebrated.
Of course. Yeah, they were brought out because you're like, hey, it's this weird island of misfit toys. We're all here for a reason. Yeah. And it's not, you're not deliberately attending this show. This was, you had to work in some capacity to find out about this. And it's because you had plenty of time because you have no friends or whatever.
Yeah,
whatever.
And that's sort of
Yeah.
why I got into it. And most of high school was really spent further pushing towards music.
Right.
Had a couple bands in high school and, you know, going to shows and finding out about music. And really that really filled a void of this. I was like, this is what I need to do. This is how I can
Deal with the world,
express things. I knew I couldn't, you know, from an early age, I encountered the understanding that surface things aren't going to make me happy.
Right.
Like,
right. You want to go deeper.
I
Sure.
think because I started off with a certain level of unhappiness,
Yeah.
I sort of almost knew that like, there's just like, the basic model of the town I grew up in wasn't going to work for me. You know, go to school, move back, have kids, work in New York City,
Right.
work in finance. Like that model wasn't going to fit me. And I kind of saw that from, you know, a young age, early in high school, and said, fuck it.
Yeah.
And I was like, fuck you, fuck everyone. And that was my,
that was your
I'm
MO.
dyeing my hair
Right.
green, purple, pink, fuck you. I'm going to break shit. I'm going to get C's and D's. I'll pass, but I'm not going to care.
Yeah. I'll just get by.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's basically how I operated in high school. But I still, I know, for my own, I always wanted everyone to like me. I felt a real deep-seated need for everyone to really like me. So I pretty much maintained, you know, decent. I didn't really ever do anything too terrible to
Right.
anyone. So I mean that was a need of mine, which also explains why I'm the singer in a band.
Of course.
You know, because getting up on stage and
Pay attention to me. Sure.
pay attention to me and getting some mirroring and feedback of like, we like you. I mean, it's like
course.
without that drive for that. You'd never be driven to be.
Not at all.
This.
It's not a natural thing.
No.
And that, it's such an important point where it's like so many people don't realize that's why, usually people that, whatever, stand-up comedians, singers, whatever, it's like you look at them, you're just like, most normal people don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, kind of alluding to what you were talking about earlier in regards to the various masks that obviously, you wear as you go through life. And so, like, obviously it's like when we talked about wanting to do this months ago, and you were telling me about the struggles that you were going through in regards to, like, obviously, like, not only throughout your life, but then as Senses Fail started to grow and become a thing, can you kind of walk me through like I know there's different facets in it, but walk me through the different sort of masks that you were putting on when you were, just inherently harming yourself, being really self-destructive, and like, kind of walking me through that.
Yeah, fast forward end of high school, basically 9/11 happened, which I feel like plays a really big role in my life.
Yeah.
And in our music scene, specifically in the Northeast. And
definitely,
I think truly reinforced that the world is not a safe place. There is death and suffering on a level that is very large and very real, in which, I think a part of me learned that very early on in life when I first started experiencing life, panic attacks, whatever. I had that sense of that life is scary, dangerous.
Yeah, that foreboding, sure. Yeah.
And it was almost reaffirmed by 9/11. So 9/11 really fucked me up because I had this period of most of my life, since then, that was pretty calm and pretty normal. Like, I acted out and I did all this shit, but I wasn't really like, I felt somewhat stable.
Okay. Yeah.
And then 9/11 happened. And it was very real, very serious for me. And it was on a level that was like, yes, reaffirming this life is fucked, and that you are not safe, and that there is no hope. And that has always been in the back of my head. But
to have it put out.
It came out there. So as soon as that happened, I made the decision that I'm not going to college. I'd started this band. We did the band, and we kind of, Senses Fail started a different version of it, whatever.
Yeah.
And kind of was like, we're going to do this. Because like, it was sort of almost like, well, your life's fucked. You're going to die anyways. Do you want to go do this, or do you want to go try to do that? And then, a couple months later, I wrote a song about him. His name is Steven. He died. It was the first, I think everybody's had it in their life. The one person when you're young that dies, that sort of represents the end of your innocence.
Totally.
Except for me, it was 9/11 that sort of, I don't feel like, and this is always a big theme throughout my music, is I think dealing with that, I never really had much innocence. I think I've always been very upset about that. I've always been very angry about that. I think still I'm a little upset and angry that I didn't really feel like I really got to experience a lot of that.
Of course. Because it was it was obviously out of your control. You had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
It was given to you. Right.
And I think a lot of music is a reaction to that, but then the reaffirming of 9/11 happening with that, and just being so close to the city and knowing people directly affected by it and being able to see it from your town, and it felt very real. And then having a friend die 2 months after that was just like, I was just listening to Jet's Brazil Orange Rhyming Dictionary constantly. And I got very, very depressed. It was a very depressing time. But because of that, I got very into like a lot of the spirituality and psychology and philosophy that I got into, because I was searching for answers for like life questions. Like that was the ground for the band.
Right.
Was those events and all that previous history was the grounds for me to be able to feel compelled to really go out and sort of just try to make sense of it in whatever way I could.
Right.
So, the beginning of Senses Fail was really, was really exciting. It was a real relief,
Sure.
I think from like everything that I had experienced, I really felt like, having the success and the mirroring of people liking what you're doing and being drawn to you and liking you, and you being able to express yourself and people liking that, but then also people like really relating to your experience was probably the most gratifying thing and safe thing that I'd ever felt, because it was the first time that I really had people like relating to me, to my experience. Because, in high school, like I had friends, but I was always the one that like, he's the fucked up one.
Right,
we couldn't really relate. We could relate on everything, but it was always like, you don't really understand,
Of
the
course.
the stereotypical, like,
We're not on the same level, sure.
stereotypical, like, motif of the goth kid that you
Yeah.
don't understand. But, like, it's very different when you are that person.
Yeah.
And that was the ground. So the beginning of Senseless Fail was amazing. I mean, it really was. It was just everything I ever wanted to do.
Right.
Everything I wanted to get away from, I got away from. And thought.
Yeah, you thought. Right.
It
was ultimately just a distraction.
Yeah, distraction. And really, I mean, for the beginning of Senseless Fail, I really, it was great. I really look back on that time as just being one of the more freeing times in my life, because it was going from really having just the fact you can get up every night and play music and have like a release and then have that given back to you was something I didn't get a lot of.
Right.
I didn't get a lot of the...
everything's so immediate.
Yeah. I didn't get that. And that, in my life, I never got that. So this was it. So this was like, I think the golden age.
Yeah.
Of me being alive for the first, up until, band started, everybody knows all the history of the band anyway.
Right.
So then my grandma died when I was 20.
Okay.
She died when we were on the Silverstein tour.
Okay.
And I couldn't process it, and I wasn't willing to, because I was like, my life is so fucking good right now. Like, this band has taken me to this level of success. It was after Still Searching came out. We were selling out, 2,000 cap venues. We were, it was fucking the beginning of the peak, ramping it up.
Right.
It was just there was no end in sight. It was the beginning of that music, where like everybody was getting signed, these bands. It was really exciting.
Of course.
The possibilities were endless. And then my grandma died, and I was like, I don't want to deal with this. Well, she was dying, and I really couldn't be there for her dying, because I really couldn't. I didn't have any space. I didn't have any ability because of my attachment to her too. I couldn't deal with it. So to
be fair, you selfishly couldn't deal with it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like it's like you probably, in some capacities, obviously, like, wanted to be there, but you're just like, oh, I can't handle that. I can't see her like that.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
So she passed away while we were on the tour, and I, one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't go home. I couldn't. I stayed on the tour, and I was like, this is more important. It's more important to be on the tour,
right? To
be in Senseless Fail, to play music, than it was to go home. And it was more important because I probably couldn't really handle it. So, I came home and everything's fine. And then, like, kind of out of nowhere, I just started having panic attacks again.
Okay.
Like, it was, so I'd been, I'd stopped having panic attacks around like 8, 9.
Yep.
And they'd gone this entire time.
A good 11 years. Yeah.
And then out of nowhere, it just smacked me in the face. And I didn't know the correlation. It took me years to really figure out, like, everything. But because I didn't know what this was, and I literally thought I was dying. I mean, I literally had no idea what was going on. I just felt like the world's collapsing, and we were about to go on tour in Europe on the Vagrant tour. And I probably shouldn't have gone on tour.
Yeah.
It was very frightening if anybody's ever experienced it. Especially because I had cut off the beginning of my life. I really hadn't. The only way I was experiencing the beginning of my life was through music, and I'm talking about it not consciously through lyrics. I wasn't, I'm not like, it was very much just sort of whatever's coming out.
Stream of consciousness, sure, yeah.
And it's coming from there, and it's going here, but it's not landing.
It's filtering through, right.
Here. And I was a fucking mess. I was a fucking mess. Like, I couldn't even leave the house. I was so jazzed up.
Right.
Fearful, jacked up. And the thing that was fucked up is, like, my body remembered from the original instances what this was. My mind wasn't really there, but my body knew, and it was very intense, and it was very much like, oh my God, like this, I can't believe this is.
Were you self-medicating at all?
No, not yet. Okay. I knew consciously that I didn't want to self-medicate. I didn't want to start drinking or smoking, because I knew that I'd use it as as
a coping mechanism.
Yes.
Sure, right.
So I tried to avoid that for a while.
Right.
We went on this tour. I was miserable. It was fucking terrible. It was in Europe in the winter. It was like
worst place for you to be.
3.5 weeks long. Oof. And it was my first time dealing with anxiety and panic attacks. I mean, I wasn't sleeping. I was I just grasping at, I really shouldn't have been on tour. But I said, no, I said, fuck it. You know, this is the one thing that
is a constant
has given me any kind of peace. And I was, you know, freaking out on stage and not able to like really function. And, you know, we came home and I'd not wanted to take medication before then because I was very afraid of it. I just was very afraid of what it would do to me, or I just didn't want to take it. So I came home and I was like, I have to take, like, I can't I need something to
keep going.
Because my body was literally just, if anybody knows the cycles of when you start having anxiety and panic attacks, it becomes this endless cycle where you start fearing the fear, and then you're just in this lock of like every time you feel it, you just then perpetuate it, and it's this really fucked up cycle.
Terrible.
That you don't really know how to, and when you're in it, you have no idea how to end it. You have no idea that it's going to end. You think that this is it, and it's fucked up because it's not even so much of a depression thing, like where you don't want to, where you want to disappear. You kind of want to slink off and not exist. This is like, I want to kill myself to end this.
Yeah, I got to stop this somehow, right?
Yeah, but I never was too suicidal then, just because the thought of not existing to me is a very like difficult and anxiety filled thought in my head, where it would actually be easier if I think at times I had not had that. I would have felt like suicide was some sort of option. But for me in that period, I just felt like that in itself was anxiety inducing, thinking about the idea of not existing. And so I was a complete mess. Sure. It's a complete mess. And it was probably the peak of the band, really. Okay. You know, the band is like Lennon Fold would come out. Right. Finally, we were just did the Vagrant tour in Europe. We were killing it everywhere. We were about to go on the first Taste of Chaos tour. Right. And here I am. And this is like, I'm going through a very, very, very difficult, fucked up, you know, dealing with the death of my grandma and not knowing how to deal with it. Right. Really not knowing how to deal with it. Like, I really didn't know what to do. And my body was experiencing this loss in this way that felt very traumatic. So it reverted to this, like, this is overload. We're going offline. Right. You know, and just experiencing extreme amounts of anxiety. And
so then you started taking medication then?
I came back from the tour, started taking medication, and we got to play Conan, which is like, this is sort of the pinnacle of where everything went downhill, because we had done Jimmy Kimmel and went great. I have always had a lot of, obviously, you know, I'm very insecure, and was always very insecure about my voice. And in the beginning, I sang very well. As I started to grow older, my voice dropped a little, combined with this sort of mental obstacles I was experiencing. I lost control of my voice and any sort of confidence in being able to express myself that way.
Right. You're like, something I've known how to do for years, all of a sudden it's more difficult for me to do.
And yeah. And so I started taking medication, and we came home from Europe and whatever. And I decided to start seeing a therapist. He was terrible. He was a Freudian therapist. He really wasn't compassionate at all. I'll get to him in a minute. But, so yeah, but for Census Found, this will explain sort of where things go. But when we went on Conan, I was a complete mess. Right. You
were so fragile. Right.
So fragile. We had just done, I believe, the tsunami relief benefit at Take It Back Sunday in my cam at it was a tsunami in was it
Indonesia? Yeah, the Philippines.
Philippines. Maybe. No, it was Thailand. It happened.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
right.
In 2005 or 4, one of them, and we got word that like, yo, Conan wants you to come on. So we rehearsed at that show to do Rum Is for Drinking, because I didn't feel like I could sing Buried Alive, couldn't hit the high notes. So I was like, let's do Rum Is for Drinking. So, you know, I don't blame anyone, because I just don't think there's a lot of discussion about, like, there's more discussion now about, you know, sort of dealing with anxiety and stuff like that. Right. I just think people thought I was just a head case singer, and it was like, I absolutely was. Right. I was. That's exactly what I was doing. But I was in need of like some serious, somebody to go, shut this shit down. Like, stop fucking touring, get yourself right. Let's figure some stuff out. Let's get you some help. Right. You know, Instead, it was like, well, let's get Buddy some pills from this one guy we know. He can send you stuff. And it's like, managers should have pulled the plug, but
Yeah, the train was already left the station.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So it was like, okay, well, and I'm like, I'm not going to quit. Like, I'm not going to pull my own plug. Or like,
No.
And
you don't have the wherewithal to do that.
Yeah. And it was just like, okay, cool. So we're going to do this Conan thing. And I was this fucking disaster. It was fucking a nervous wreck. Like, I couldn't handle that level of pressure already on top of all the other things,
right?
All the other things that had been going on in my life that I couldn't really process yet. And I went on and we started the song and I blanked out and I forgot the lyrics. And it was like, I'd never felt, I think, so vulnerable. And this is the beginning of when I really started to hate myself. I think there's always been some level of self-hatred with me.
Okay.
There's always been this level of like, you're flawed, you're fucked up. But this is when I feel like you fucked up to the point where like,
this is unforgivable.
And the reaction back then was much bigger than it would be now. Like, I think in context, band being on a late night television show back then is much more.
Well, it was more rare to happen back then.
It was, and that was also too. I felt like we fucking blew it. I felt like we were put in a position and an opportunity.
Was that so? That was the direct feedback that you heard. Was that like, oh yeah, you guys are pretty terrible on that?
I don't even know. Honestly, I just came to the dressing room afterwards and was like, "This is it." Like,
well,
this is it.
That was it.
This is it.
Yeah,
This is a disaster. And that was like the beginning of the slide down into sort of like where I'd live for the next like 10 years, just because it was almost like all my worst suspicions of myself had been confirmed, that like I couldn't take it. I couldn't handle it.
Right.
I couldn't deal with it. Life had become really overwhelming for me in all aspects, even to the point where like I couldn't really physically, I wasn't eating, like I couldn't eat, like I had no appetite. If anybody who's ever like really suffered from not just a panic attack, but like prolonged generalized anxiety, and you have no appetite. And it's like the first time that it ever happens in your life, it's really disruptive because you don't have any coping mechanisms. You don't have any previous experience with it. You don't understand that this will pass. This is just a
this is temporary, right? It feels permanent for you.
It feels permanent. And you're starting to take medication, and you're just starting to like, what is wrong with me? And you have this real flawed sense of yourself that was already there, and now is just really being confirmed.
Right.
It was a really terrible time in my life. And then that's when I started drinking.
Okay.
Was after that. I think I just said, fuck it. I was like, what's going to help here? What's going to help? Because I started taking medication and it helped, but like anyone who's ever been on the medication knows it like takes the edge off, but it doesn't take away any of the pain, the like weight or the
burden is still there.
Anything. It takes away that like, it's just something's called disassociation. A lot. I mean, what it is a defense mechanism for like if you were being eaten by a bear,
right? You
would disassociate from your body.
Of course, right.
Where you don't really have much contact with it, control, and you're sort of almost out of body experience.
Right. You feel like you're floating above it.
To alleviate. It's a defense mechanism to alleviate the amount of pain, the amount of suffering that's happening. You disassociate, and that's a lot of times common. What happens with people with panic attacks is you disassociate, and it's very fucking scary because you literally like are disassociating out of your body. Nothing feels real. Nothing feels right.
Right.
And
you're just kind of you're probably trying to grasp at any sense of reality.
Yeah, and you feel like you're going crazy, and the medication kind of stops that response. It stops the disassociative stuff. It stops some of the symptoms and gives you a break, which I think if the medication is a must for people who've never had it before. I think to get out of
out of
the cycle of it, you need something to stop you.
Right.
Stop it and have a break and go, okay. There is a break.
Right.
There is.
Where can we go from here?
Yeah.
Sure.
And but I started, but it didn't take away any of the guilt or the pain or the anything. It was all still there. It was just
it's surface,
masked.
Right. Surface level.
I started drinking, drinking
Heavily.
heavily. I drank every single day from 2005 until March 2014.
Wow.
Every single day.
Okay.
I missed one day.
Okay.
One day I didn't drink. One day in like 2007. One day. Okay. I drank every single
every
day.
day. Yeah. 365 days.
Every single day.
Okay.
And it ranged from being a couple drinks to 8 to
blackout
getting
drunk.
annihilated.
Sure.
It ebbed and flowed, from the varying degrees of dependence, and it was the only thing that made me feel okay.
Of course, yeah. It was the numbing agent.
It was the only, like literally the only thing that I know that I could turn to that would shut it off. Right. That would shut my mind off. That would shut my body off. That I could go to as like, okay,
you're like, this is solid.
If whatever happens, I can fall back to drinking. It will alleviate what needs to be dealt with right now. Yeah, and I drank. I guess that's however many years. I guess that's 10.
Yeah.
Almost that 9 years.
9 years. Yeah.
9 years of straight
abuse.
Straight abuse, really. I went in and out of like what you'd technically call alcoholic stages. You know what I mean? And that was why I never really like looked for help. Mm-hmm. And why nobody? Yeah,
because you probably filtered in and out, like you were saying. It was an ebb and flow.
It was weird. It was weird though. I just, and not until now, not until I stopped drinking, and really, recently, until the last year. Mm-hmm. Like I had a serious fucking problem. Not drinking every single night for 9 years is a serious fucking problem. I don't care if it's 3 beers a night or you're getting blackout drunk. I think that level of dedication to numbing and turning your mind off is a serious addiction.
It is.
And I definitely, I knew it and I never wanted to admit it. I mean, half my fucking songs are about it, but I never wanted to I never wanted to admit it. I never wanted to like.
Well, yeah, because you're in it. So you have no ability to.
I didn't want to admit it because I didn't want to stop.
Of course.
Because I didn't feel like there was any way.
That was your standby.
Yeah.
I'm sure with that obviously completely opens the doors for bad judgment, other things that could be self-destructive.
Yeah. Through that time period of 2005, I think through 2009.
Okay.
I also became a very serious sex addict.
Mm-hmm.
I probably spent thousands and thousands of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars on like escorts.
Sure.
Prostitutes.
Sure. I find it interesting that there's a lot of things I find interesting about it, but I find it interesting that you went there in regards to, because, realistically, in general terms, you could have literally reached out to any female in your audience, so to speak, and they probably would have been interested in participating in some of the escort-like activities. But did you feel like that was, you could kind of separate the two, where it's like an escort?
There was something that I was very driven. There's many layers to it.
Sure.
One layer was I liked the fact that they'd go away.
Yeah, it was just a simple exchange.
It's a simple exchange.
Yep.
I liked the fact that it also reinforced, every time I did it, reinforced some level of excitement.
Okay.
And then immediately melt with an extreme level of guilt and self-hatred. So if anybody's ever been in a self-destructive pattern,
mm-hmm.
a lot of it is bouncing between the excitement of the destructive behavior mm-hmm. and then the sheer destruction of the guilt and shame that you feel.
Right.
And it's this seesaw of back and forth of dealing with it.
Right.
I didn't get out of sleeping with fans. I also truly, of course I did, my fair share of that.
Yeah. But it didn't give you
it also, I always truly really felt terrible for doing it. I felt like I was taking advantage of being in a band, and I just
sure.
I never wanted that to be the band's
reputation.
Yeah. This was my own thing. I mean,
well, it does. I mean,
the band members. I mean, most of these guys never knew any of this.
Right.
I'd disappear for hours.
Right.
Just off doing fucked up shit.
Right. And so as you were doing this was, how bad did it get, so to speak, as far as like you were saying, you spent thousands of dollars. So it's like you were on tour for, for 4 weeks would you be?
I mean, I do it at home. I do it on tour. I do it in other countries. There was no limit to it. I mean, there was no limit to that. I mean, I took that further than I took the drinking.
Okay.
The drinking, I was always able to like keep it somewhat manageable to where I presented this like, well, he's not an alcoholic. He's just in a band, which, you know, is pretty true because most people that tour and, you know, a lot of people that do tour and a lot of people that get into this lifestyle are functioning alcoholics. I mean, you're drinking 6, 7, 8 drinks every night.
Yep.
You know, and plus a lot of this was going on during my college years. So, you know, 20, 21, 22, 23, people, it's very acceptable to be.
Yeah, no one's giving you
completely
a weird
up.
glance. Yeah, for sure.
So that one I was keeping manageable. This was completely unmanageable and dangerous and fucked up. I spent,
and you were keeping a secret from everybody.
Nobody knows. I mean, nobody other than, you know, I think the couple people that I've told really know.
Sure.
You know, I mean,
less than a handful. Right.
I mean, unless they did some of their own searching or really like
following you or whatever.
Yeah, or maybe some of them had hints. I mean, you know, I had a serious problem. I mean, I had a serious addiction and the addiction was to, and now that I've been able to like process this a little, I mean, it's to the release. It's to the release. You know, I never got into any hard drugs. Luckily, it was never my body couldn't take cocaine. Like my nervous system, because of my anxiety and because of my stuff, I was already up here.
Yeah.
Any of the like real hard shit,
right?
Like,
any of the uppers, sure, right?
Never really. I never gravitated towards because I didn't feel like I wanted to seriously fuck myself up. Right. Like I wanted to emotionally destroy myself. Doing this sort of activity that was secretive. Self-destructive, dangerous, physically dangerous, emotionally dangerous.
When you mean physically dangerous, do you mean like just the actual like hoops?
The act of doing it? I mean, you know, going to, you know, like
I was going to say the hoops you would jump through in order to get this escort or go to this weird place or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, that's dangerous, but then also like sexually, you know, being sexually active in that way is really dangerous as well.
Yeah.
And then that became another layer that I padded on. I became a complete hypochondriac for like 4 or 5 years. I actually convinced myself I had HIV. For years, I thought I had HIV. I had unprotected sex with someone, and for whatever reason, I just convinced myself that I had AIDS and or HIV.
Sure.
And I just lived in a. It was a very weird cycle of this ball. You felt I was living in this ball where I'd just act out, where I'd act out. I'd then drink to numb that. I'd feel a sense of separation. I'd then convince myself I had some sort of serious flaw, like actual disease.
Right.
Have a relief from. I'd get myself all wound up, self-diagnose, come to terms with the fact that I don't have it, and then go and do it again. I don't know. I couldn't even put a number on how many times I did it. I would say 70 or 80. Probably around there. I honestly don't know.
You would know.
I don't have a recollection, most of them. And the funny thing was, for all of them, I was probably sober. It wasn't like I would get drunk and go do it or get fucked up and go do it. It was like, it was the alcohol was always there for me to deal with the pain and the shame and to bring me back down from all of the stuff. The alcohol was always almost like a medicine, like a remedy. Like, okay, I went and did all this terrible shit.
Yeah, and because I mean, the process of obviously, you know, finding an escort and doing this like that takes effort, and then you yourself want to be present at that because you're like, you know, either from just a practical standpoint of like, I'm paying good money for this, like I want to be here for this, I need to feel that feeling like you're talking about of release, and then like you said, the heavy guilt that lays after, then you're able to go back to alcohol and be like, okay, this is where I'm at.
Because I always kept alcohol in a position where I never felt guilty about it because I always wanted it to be there. So I never wanted to overuse it. My relationship with it was like, I'm never going to overuse you because I always need you. I don't ever want to have to stop drinking.
Sure.
Because all else can fail, at least I have this. And now that like I'm stepping away from it, I realize how dependent, you know.
Totally.
I mean, you really, you know, I mean, it's really difficult to see all of it when you're in it. You know, I mean,
it's impossible. Well, you don't have a perspective. All you're doing.
You know, you do. I mean, it's there. It's always in you. You know, it's there, which is one of the things that fuels so much of it is that you know what you're doing is what you're doing. And what makes it so hard is that you just don't feel like you have the tools or courage to not do it.
Right. Yeah.
And that's what ultimately really makes some of it so fucking hard, is because you know what you're doing is so detrimental to yourself, to everyone around you, you know, to your soul, to your spirit.
You're chipping away at it.
You're just yeah, I mean, just fucking just stabbing it.
Totally.
Just chipping until until you get to a point where it's either too much.
Right.
And you either die.
Yeah.
Or you do the opposite. I think that's usually how these things work.
Totally. You hit bottom, or yeah. And so like all during this time, you know, as
this is the biggest the band is. This is the biggest Census Fail is, ever will be, ever was. The highlight of my career. The worst time in my entire life. It was a miserable experience. I hated every minute of it.
Yeah, you were wearing a mask. You were wearing, you know, the only times where you felt relief were, you know, when you were hiring escorts and you were walking away from the show because you're like, I can't even deal with any of this.
Yeah, well, we had we went and did still searching, and that was the lowest. I was living alone in Jersey City, and I'd had a girlfriend through a lot of this period, and you know, had a great amount of guilt, and it was really that record is that dark because it was fucking that dark,
right?
You know, like I think
that wasn't a facade.
No, it was really, really like I was, you know, every night just, you know, drinking like a half a bottle. I used to drink gin and tonic. That was like my thing back then. I'd drink like half a bottle of gin, and then every now, you know, once a week or however many times a week, I'd go and find some escort and then just go do that. And then we were writing the record, and then I'd wake up, I'd go to bed at like 5, 6 in the morning, wake up at 11 and go to the studio, you know, go to our practice spot. Then we'd write the record. And
right.
That was the contents of how I was writing that record.
How you were putting it together.
And I couldn't sing. I wasn't singing well. I mean, I didn't even want to be alive, really. You know,
sure.
Like, let alone singing.
Let alone perform, right?
It's kind of supposed to be like singing is supposed to be a very powerful, I'm here, this is me, here is what I sound like. Here's all of me. Here's what I sound like. I sounded fucking terrible.
Right.
You know? That's why my voice on that record sounds really rugged and
rough,
fucked up. And that's what I had to give.
Yeah.
Vocally. That's all I could give. And,
right.
and so the rest of the band got really upset. And that started the whole process of kind of, for the next like year and a half, serious discussions of kicking me out of the band. Okay. Almost happened a couple times. You know, it was just, I was miserable.
The lowest of the low.
Lowest of the low. And, you know, and then I was getting kicked out of the band. And
right.
It was just, when that really started ramping up towards the end of Still Searching, everybody felt like, you know, Conan was kind of the big sort of what the fuck thing. And then it was just like, he just can't get his shit together. He's a mess. You know, he's drinking a lot. Who knows what the fuck else he's doing.
Right.
He can't sing. He's not good. So most of Still Searching was fucking terrible.
Yeah.
Like as soon as Still Searching came out and we started the world tour was really when some of the other members of the band were like, you got to get your shit together. I was like, dude, I got so much shit to get together. Like, I don't
even know where to begin.
I don't know what, like, okay, you want me to start singing better? Okay. I couldn't fix my voice.
Yeah, you were helpless.
I was helpless. Like, so it was just a really tough situation because I couldn't sing any better because I had no joy. I had nothing to feel
to
good
work
about.
from. Sure. Yeah.
And my voice had dropped because of all the drinking and all the smoking and all the shit I'd done anyways. Plus I was 22 and not 18.
Yeah.
You know, when I was singing in a higher register, my voice had kind of dropped.
Right.
So I couldn't sing that way anyways. So I spent a lot of time, you know, trying to like remedy that within the band and then self-medicating and then doing all the other stuff. And it was just a fucking mess. It was a disaster. It was a terrible, like that record cycle and that record, I don't even remember a lot from it. It was just terrible. It was a terrible experience. Yet we were selling out every show we played.
Right.
Selling
the highest of highs you should be.
Hundreds of thousands of records.
Right.
You know, Census Failed. You know, that was our big record.
That was your moment.
That was our moment, and I was not.
And you weren't present for.
I wasn't present. I wasn't available. I was getting kicked out of the band.
Yeah. And so, as you were, you know, as you were going through your darkest times, was that also the beginning of where you were you were struggling with like your sexual identity and kind of like where that all sat in your head, or was that something that had always manifested itself and you were just able to experiment more with it?
I mean, as far as my sexual identity goes, that's been something that's been there forever.
Okay.
That's not something that just came up then or at any point. It had always been there. It had just always been a question of, I think it's difficult for me to define this because it seems undefinable, and I know that doesn't work for some people.
Yeah, of course. Well, people want to paint.
I totally understand.
Of course.
I get it. But
yeah.
I've, and this is what a lot of this is about, is not only discussing all the struggles that I've been through that are clearly, evident on record.
Yeah.
They're there.
You've
in
put
the
it
songs,
out there. Right.
I've never really discussed any of the what was actually behind that, and this other level of my sexuality and sort of not really feeling like I'm straight, not feeling like I'm gay, not feeling like I'm bi, really sort of is a thread that's run through my entire life that's really made me in any situation never feel comfortable. Okay. Because I've always been attracted to everything.
Yeah.
I've only had relationships with women. I've had sexual relationships with everyone.
Okay.
With men, with women, with girls that dress like guys, with guys that dress like girls, with, there's no limit to that.
You've explored every sexual side of a person that you could potentially.
Yeah.
Right.
And I don't feel like I'm bi. I don't feel like I want to have a committed relationship with a man.
But you've had committed relationships with women.
Yeah. And currently I'm in with someone who I feel like I'll be with for the rest of my life. And she's a she.
Yeah. She's a she. Right.
Yeah. I mean, this is a big thread that I really didn't realize until pretty recently. I wasn't able to admit it. I think I just wanted to fight it. And because it was never too apparent. I never felt like there was a label for it.
It's true.
And there isn't a label for it. And that was part of the problem for me was, what the fuck is wrong with me? Like, I'm not gay. Like, I can't go be part of the gay team. Like, God, that might have been a little bit easier for me to be, maybe not easier. And that's an insensitive way to put it.
Well, no, easier in the sense of defining.
Easier.
Right.
Yeah.
Define. It would be easier for you to define from the cultural standpoint.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Or even say I was bi, and then I could be like, well, I'm kind of,
here's my definition.
But I'm like,
right.
I never felt like I had a definition. I never felt like I had a boundary, and I never felt comfortable exploring any of it, and I never felt comfortable talking about it. And that's not because my parents weren't open or even my friends. I just feel like I and this is part of the reason why I want to talk about this. I just feel like I never felt comfortable talking about it because I never had like a place to put it. And I think that the sexual fluidity or identity, being fluid is not something that's really a conversation being had. Maybe it is in places, but definitely not in our world, not in the punk world, not in the hardcore world, not in the, obviously with Laura Jane Grace, there's been a great, a larger discussion.
There's at least more of awareness.
And that's been amazing. But I feel like coming from the standpoint of being a guy that identifies as like, if you saw me, you'd be like, that's a fucking straight dude. It's like, I'm not. I'm not by definition straight. Right. And that was always my biggest thing is like, well, then what am I? Like, I'm not gay, but I definitely don't feel fucking straight.
Yeah.
And I definitely know that I'm never been straight, but I definitely know that I'm not like gay. What the fuck am I?
Right.
What am I? And I like,
it's like you're like, I am attracted to people. I am attracted to humans. That's the easiest way you can describe yourself. You're like, I'm attracted to humans. I'm not interested in a committed relationship with a man. I'm interested in a committed relationship with a woman. Where does that leave me?
Yeah. And it kind of leaves me nowhere. And I'm sure that there's many other people out there like me. And I think that a lot of what happened with me, with all the escorts and with everything, was my way of experimenting, because I did not feel comfortable experimenting in any other way, because I felt that because of the fact that I was semi, like, I don't want to say famous, but
Well, you were recognizable. Yeah.
I just felt like going into, you know, a gay bar, or going into like a trans show or whatever. I don't know. I don't know. I had nobody. I'd also had no friends like that. Like
Right.
I wasn't, because I wasn't identifying myself as gay. I really didn't have a lot of friends that maybe I would be like, yeah, let's go do this. Like, no, it's fucking me. Like,
yeah. Well, you were already so isolated.
yeah, I was so isolated anyways.
Intentionally.
Yeah. I mean, I'd already had all this other stuff going on, and this theme of sexuality was run through my whole life, which also made me, you know, attributed to this idea that I was flawed in some way, like deeply flawed.
Right.
You know, this is one of the other things that, you know, I've never talked about, never mentioned, but does attributed to me feeling so flawed, because
right. Links back to that.
All of the escort stuff was mainly with, you know, not women. It was with transsexual women and men, and it was just sort of my way of, how can I experiment?
You felt like that was a safe place to do so.
It felt like the safest place.
Sure.
It literally felt like the safest place, because I knew I was attracted to that stuff, but I didn't feel comfortable like being open about it, and I didn't feel comfortable experimenting in other places for fear that I'd be found out. Plus, I didn't even know what the fuck was going on.
Yeah.
You know, and it was really too, I also really felt the deep-seated companionship with the level of suffering that maybe somebody who, you know, does have to do that kind of stuff for work.
Sure.
It was almost like I could be with someone that I projected felt as miserable as me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think especially to somebody, you know, who's going through a gender identity crisis, I felt like their level of suffering I could relate to.
Right.
Not their exact suffering, but just the level, the weight, weight of like
right.
all of the stuff that had been happening in my life, and sort of not understanding, like, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I bi? Like, my grandma's dead. The band wants to kick me out. I can't sing. Like, I'm a fucking drunk. Like, I really, really felt that a level of like, you can relate.
Yeah.
In that way, that somebody, you know, who's been through, you know, I don't know I don't know the exact term for it is, but, you know, has sort of a transsexual woman or man.
Well, there's a struggle there. It's evident.
There's a definite struggle of feeling like
they don't belong in their own skin.
They don't belong in their own skin, and that's basically the way I felt my whole life. I felt absolutely terrible for not being able to be a straight guy.
Yeah.
I fucking hated myself for it.
Right.
I hated myself for it. And then I did all these things, made me hate myself even more. You know, all of the paying for sex, and then it filled me up with so much guilt and shame that I don't know. I'm surprised I'm even like made it out. I don't really know what,
I was going to say, cause I mean, to put an overarching pin in all this, where it's like, I mean, I'm honestly, I'm glad that I've known you over the past year rather than knowing you like 5 years ago. Cause I see, I mean, the buddy that sits in front of me, and I see where you're at now and everything that you've shared with me prior to this and during this. And like you have a more of a sense of clarity, obviously, on not only wanting to express this, but then kind of not even so much who you are, but where you want to go. And I think that's like, to me, that's the most gratifying thing you can kind of see in a person, where you're like, dude, you're not shackled by your past. You are, whether you're optimistic or not about your future, at least you're looking forward. At least you have something. And that's the thing that I've seen in you, where it's like, I have this, you know, I have meditation. I have things that I can do that aren't self-destructive, you know?
Yeah, that's true.
And it's just it's so interesting to watch that from that perspective. And like you said, I mean, I think the biggest point that you're trying to make in all this is the fact that you want people to have open dialogues about this.
Yeah.
And to have a safe place in which to have an open dialogue about this. Not only because, you know, no diminishing what people go through, but, you know, alcohol and drug abuse is like that. People can talk about that.
Yeah.
It's a safe place to talk about. But sexual addiction, sexual abuse, that's not like sexual abuse, of course, to a certain extent, where like molestation and stuff like that, clearly that's like spoken about, but there's a tabooness about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think that the fact that you want to have an open dialogue about sexuality and what that means within the context of independent music, like that's, to me, that's the point of what you're trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, the point is to, someone like me who's maybe 20 years old who doesn't identify as straight or gay can not feel like they have to experiment in this way that, I don't know, brings a great deal of fear and shame. And I mean, you're also spreading that too. It's also, it's like a cycle of not have to do what I did to come to this realization. I think if I had known someone who maybe had felt the same way, I might have been able to have more courage to say, look at that guy.
This is a thing.
This is a thing. There's that guy. And I, I'm not saying that I think I should be that one for someone, but I do think that I'm willing to talk about it because I want to live authentically and I don't want to cover parts of who I am in order to protect myself. I don't feel the need
you're trying to
do that anymore. I don't want to live like that. And this is a big part of it because this is who I am. This is my story. I mean, this is what this band is about. This band is about an autobiographical journey through depression, addiction, all kinds of addiction and great, like sexual identity. I mean, that's what this band is. So it's like to not talk about this or to go into writing these later records, which are about a way out or some sort of peace and not to truly, really dig up. Part of me didn't want to make it public, but it's like, it's already public. I mean, it's already It's already there.
You just didn't. You yourself weren't. You're not able to explain the context to everybody.
Yeah, and so, also too, it's like there's this level of you're only going to get as much peace as you're willing to let go. Like you're only going to get as much as you're willing to let go of.
Sure.
And I think that I have faith that if I can let go of this piece that I have protected for so long, that then there's an infinite amount of more peace that I can have by not having to carry this a secret, guilt. I mean, this whole, it took up 10 years of my life of really, just deep-seated depression, anxiety, shame, guilt, drinking, alcohol, just all of it. And the whole time on top of all of it, this feeling that like there was something really wrong with me, that the fact that I couldn't identify as a straight man, it really fucking bothered me.
Yeah.
It really bothered me. And it bothered me that I couldn't identify as a gay man either. I couldn't identify as either. And it made me feel very fucking isolated.
Right.
And that's sort of what I'm hoping to start to talk about and be open about and dialogue about, that like, you don't have to be gay. You don't have to be straight.
Totally.
You can float in between. It's a real thing. It's not, and because there's a lot of discussion, and anytime you hear someone say they're bi, it's like pick a side.
Yeah.
So it's got, it's gone from like, okay, cool, it's okay to be, it almost feels like, within some of the more obviously it's not okay to be anything. In certain parts of the world and in this country, it's not okay to. Yeah,
it's still not okay to be gay or whatever, right?
It's not okay to be anything really. But in some of the more liberal areas, it's not okay to be bi. That's too much. You can't have both.
Right.
It's not even okay to, it's like never felt okay to be not like fluid. It just,
yeah.
And it,
well, I think ultimately the point is that there needs to be a place where people can feel these things safely and feel these things and understand that people go through this. And people go through like whether or not it's sexual identity, it could be some other thing where a person doesn't feel attached,
doesn't feel identified with whatever it is. I mean, it's all, it's different circumstances, same isolation.
Exactly.
Which is, you want
to pull it in.
Moving forward. And I'd like Census Fail to represent, a place where people who do feel isolated in an extreme sense and in any sense. I mean, any time that I think anybody feels isolated, that's what pushes so much of our hangups and suffering and why we create, this, I think they're saying hurt people. I mean, it doesn't get any more. I know that it's so lame to like say, hurt people. It's like, but
it's true.
You look at anybody who's causing any sort of harm to anyone.
Yep.
They probably are internally experiencing some level
inner
discomfort
anguish,
or some discomfort and I experienced that for years, and I felt just the need to really sort of put this out there because I feel like I've been open about everything else in the band, and
this
is like one of
the last stone unturned, right?
The last sort of thing to talk about. Well, I couldn't have really talked about it when I was in it.
No,
and it's been years since I really did a lot of the going to an escort and stuff like that. I've been in a committed relationship for like 4 years now. So it's been years, but even then, like, and my girlfriend knew when we started our relationship out, like my sexual identity and all of this stuff. That's really one, because I went for a long time being like, I'm never going to be able to tell people that like I've slept with transsexual women and guys, and I'm going to have to keep this secret for the rest of my fucking life. Like, I'm never going to find someone that's going to think that this is okay.
Sure.
And that was my outlook. I mean, that was really like, my outlook was, okay, you're just going to have to keep this a secret your whole fucking life. That was there was no option. The option was, since I feel like, I always felt like I wanted to be in a committed relationship with a woman, that I'm going to have to keep this a secret my whole fucking life. That there is no woman out there that's going to be okay with this. And, she was, and that really like opened the door to allowing myself to
let this go.
Yeah. It has been a process over the last, however many years. Yeah. It was really the first time that somebody was like, I don't care. But it was the first also time that I felt okay with saying anything.
Yeah. You had to make that first step. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, buddy, I think we got somewhere. I really appreciate. Honestly, like, I mean, when you first told me about this and we were setting this up, I couldn't be more thankful that you obviously wanted to use this as a form and trusted me enough to escort you through this, so it wasn't just you talking to Mike.
Yeah, because that would have been weird.
That would have been weird, but I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I appreciate it too. Thank you, man. Thank you.
So there you go. That was Buddy sharing his story, and I was so, taken aback, humbled, whatever adjective you want to put in that describes that feeling of just being like, wow, thank you so much for sharing this with me. When someone works up the courage to expose themselves, it's incredible. I've been fortunate enough to kind of be by people's sides as they were going through difficult times, or they wanted to admit something, that they had been doing. And the biggest lesson that I've learned in people and failings that we all have, not only towards one another, but towards ourselves, is the fact that you should always come at it from a non-judgmental place. You should never be like, oh man, like, I can't believe you did that. That's so messed up. Or, oh my gosh, that's awful. Listen to what the person is trying to say, but be there for them. Be present in that moment. And then you'll be able to help them in ways that you probably never even intended to prior to that conversation. Yeah, it's just really special that I was able to share this conversation with you, and that Buddy trusted me enough to be able to present this in a meaningful manner, and not just like, oh cool, here's like a pull quote and here's some sound bites and all that sort of stuff. So thank you very much for listening. Visit the show's website, 100wordspodcast.com. Visit our media partner, Property of Zach. The producer, as always, is Tom Richfield. And this was a great thing. Thank you so much for listening, and I will talk to you next week. Be safe, everybody.